At the start of this year, I finally got round to watching Season 1 of Andor after multiple friends had recommended it to me, quite enthusiastically I should add. A lot of these friends were fairly big Star Wars fans, but not the delusional kind. They knew that Star Wars was in the shitter, they weren't just eating up all of the slop that Disney was serving them. For the most part, I tuned out of Star Wars a long time ago. I didn't even wind up seeing Rise of Skywalker. I watched some of Mandalorian and that was decent for a time. Boba Fett I enjoyed, but it wasn't anything special. Kenobi, I can't believe I watched that, was incompetent and unimaginative, complete waste of time.
Maybe it was a lie. I knew it. I never should have trusted him.
I am what you made me.
Over the years, I've had these two particular friends whom are both Star Wars fans, and both of these people, in their own ways, have undergone similar journeys with the franchise. I've watched them both gradually become more and more disillusioned and jaded with current Star Wars, and for good reason. And although this was quite funny to witness, it was also a little bit sad. Sad and telling, really, to see a franchise that was once a beacon for fantastical escapism be reduced to a bunch of formulaic products. I know I'm not really saying anything new there, but you get the point. For me, Star Wars has been dead for a long time. I've not been making an effort to stay up to date, and when all these new shows get released, I'm just like, okay, whatever. Ahsoka, I guess. No thanks. It's been years and years of just pointless shit. Then finally, Andor came out, I think sometime last year, I'm not even sure. A few of my friends watched the episodes as they premiered, and week to week, they became more and more optimistic and enthralled. The two aforementioned Star Wars fans recommended it to me, and then another friend whose tastes are a bit more in line with mine watched it, and even he said it was great, so it went on my list. A few months ago, I finally put it on, and just to skip to the end for a second, what I saw was this mature, grisly, subtle, well-acted, well-written, heartfelt and intricate philosophical study of totalitarianism. It had appeared to have taken the Empire, which is quite an acute fictitious representation of a fascist regime already, and maximised the concept to the fullest, creating and further exploring all of these intriguing avenues of narrative and theme, investigating the possible scenarios and circumstances that may arise in a universe where such a force existed, showcasing some of the scary and inhumane things a corrupt government on this scale could do, essentially just fleshing the concept of an intergalactic empire out to the max. Andor does this by presenting the Empire through numerous different perspectives. We see the low-level personnel who are tasked with minor crimes in specific sectors, work that even your basic stormtrooper isn't called in for. We also see the tedious and bureaucratic side of the government, the pencil pushers of the institution essentially, the archivers, the document keepers. Above that we get a look inside what is essentially the FBI equivalent of the Empire, the ISB, the Imperial Security Bureau. I mean, it's obvious what that's based on. During those scenes we're given compellingly written dialogues of political plotting and strategy, detailed accounts of in-universe events that further flesh out the world.
Very well, let's have a full audit of all hyperspace lanes leading to Ord Mantell on my desk by this time tomorrow.
As you wish.
As a child, I grew up on Star Wars, as well as LEGO Star Wars. I loved this universe, so much of my imagination was entranced by this universe, and when you're so immersed in a fictitious world like this, your creative brain runs wild thinking on all of these in-universe details that may be transpiring behind the scenes, so to speak. What does Yoda eat for breakfast? Where do the Jedi go to relax? Do they watch movies? Do they go to the theatre? The opera scene in Revenge of the Sith is one example of a scene that scratches this particular itch of curiosity. What kind of lifestyles do these characters that I'm so familiar with live? Do you remember that Biggs guy who shows up at the end of the first Star Wars and it's implied that he's Luke's best friend from Tatooine? Like, what's his story? What did Luke and him do for fun back home? Like, did they race around on speeders? Did they sneak into sandcrawlers?
I just wanna fucking suck, everyone. I just wanna fucking suck, oh, the whole night through.
These are just some of the questions that an imaginative kid might ask themselves when watching these films. As you get older, maybe you rewatch the films and form different questions. How do the politics of this world function? What do imperial war councils look like? Or even simpler stuff like, what's life like for a nobody who just works at a bar somewhere in the low levels of Coruscant? All of these possibilities. Now, Andor is the first Star Wars piece of media since the prequels to feel like it was made by someone with that same sincere, imaginative curiosity towards this universe. And bear in mind, I haven't seen the Clone Wars TV show. Now, it's important that I preface this. Andor isn't arbitrary lore porn. It presents us with all of these interesting in-universe details without becoming too indulgent or overly informative. Every time we learn information about this world, it's fed to us through compelling ways, engrossing, well-acted dialogue, for instance. It's not like watching one of those robotic Senate meetings from the prequels. It's more so like viewing a small council meeting from Game of Thrones, or perhaps a hectic argument from Succession. It's talking made gripping. Seeing how the employees of the Empire's FBI discuss strategy with each other or how they interact one-to-one is the exact kind of thing that stimulates that aforementioned creative curiosity. It's so intriguing to see such an intricate depiction of a background institution within this world that's been with me since childhood. The show explores the academic ambition of various Imperial employees. It showcases interdepartmental rivalry. It puts you in the shoes of Cyril Khan, who is this young preppy employee of a corporate conglomerate that works under the umbrella of the actual Empire. He's that far down in the chain of command, but he's this ambitious young man with this forthright drive for executing the given task to the best of his ability, and even though he's working for the space Nazis, from his perspective he's doing the right thing, maintaining order, chasing down criminals. Now, right now you might be thinking to yourself, oh, now this all seems awful serious and bureaucratic for a Star Wars show, and yes it is, and you're right to think that. However, for as mature as it is, for as stark and gritty it is, for as much as it leans into the seemingly benign aspects of this fantastical world, it keeps things engaging. Never does it become boring or stale or exhaustingly bleak to the point you can't enjoy it anymore. However, for transparency's sake, I should remind you that I am a man in his mid-20s. Of course I enjoy it because it's definitely aimed at an older generation. I enjoy it in the same way I enjoy Game of Thrones or some other densely written political thriller. I don't necessarily enjoy it in the same way I do the original trilogy. It's a totally different kind of experience, but that's what makes it special to me. It's such a new and unique snapshot of this same universe. But yeah, it's most certainly geared towards a slightly older demographic, early teens to young adult kind of ballpark. With Andor, the fundamental visual language of Star Wars has been completely reworked. The space opera aspect, as well as the overall whimsicality of the initial trilogy, is almost completely removed in Andor. This was a decision that could have easily not panned out. As an example, I'm not really a big fan of Rogue One. I found that film's attempts to be this serious, gritty war film utterly pretentious and stale. However, that was down to weak character writing and melodramatic acting. Andor is not melodramatic. It doesn't come over as taking itself too seriously, because when it goes for total seriousness, it earns those sentiments. The dialogue writing has a depth and sophistication to it that as a viewer you can respect. The speeches and monologues that occur in the show are philosophically rich, so much so that it feels as though the writers are learned with history, politics and philosophy, and I'm not even kidding. For instance, with Luthen's speech in episode 10, you'll have lines like, "I burn my life to make a sunrise I know I'll never see." What this is referring to, what this entire speech is acknowledging, is a timeless archetype that's present when you look at revolutions. That being, there's always a necessary evil, a necessary monster needed to embark on this revolution. This revolution that is indeed radical, but a necessary degree of radical to overthrow totalitarian demons, essentially. To overthrow an evil so extreme, you must manifest within yourself a tempered monster of sorts.
My anger, my ego, my unwillingness to yield, my eagerness to fight, has set me on a path from which there's no escape.
When the revolution is over and the peace times have begun, these monster men, these righteous bullies, have no place in such a paradigm, as they're too radical and hardened. They're shunned by the very people who enjoy the freedom and bliss which they helped create.
I wake up every day to an equation I wrote 15 years ago from which there's only one conclusion. I'm damned for what I do. Now, the ego that started this fight will never have a mirror or an audience or the light of gratitude.
It's a sad and somber, eternal truth of war. It's not a one-to-one comparison, but there is a similar sentiment seen at the end of the Searchers film, where John Wayne walks out into the Wild West, away from the civilized life because even though he was instrumental in helping cultivate this sanctuary, he's too archaic to exist there, he's obsolete.
And what do you sacrifice?
Calm, kindness, kinship, love. I've given up all chance at inner peace. I made my mind a sunless space.
The Luthen character in Andor is such a fascinating embodiment of such ideas, as well as being an overall multi-layered reminder of the moral ambiguity of warfare, the degrees of good and evil on both sides. We see him sink to such merciless levels to do what is necessary that he veers into becoming one of the show's antagonists.
I'm condemned to use the tools of my enemy to defeat them.
There's a reason that during that pivotal scene, his visual appearance as well as the way he's blocked imitates the imagery of a Sith Lord, that Vader cape blowing behind him. The show wonderfully expands upon that basic Empire versus Rebellion, good versus evil dynamic that the original trilogy established by scrutinising in on those two figureheads and in the process painting them in all these new shades of grey. Both the Empire and the Rebellion within Andor have this interesting range of morality that we can study and assess, and that's what makes this new instalment of Star Wars meaningfully innovative. I know they attempted this before with Rogue One, which was supposed to show the darker aspects of the Rebellion, but whatever that film did to communicate that theme was simply not pungent enough to profoundly instill the sentiment. I preface this because when I watched Andor, I was so taken aback at how dark and stoic the whole thing was, how unromantic it felt, how morally grey the characters were. I'd never seen this done in Star Wars to such a potent degree. The tone that Andor manages to cultivate is so acutely adult and dystopian that some of it was almost cumbersomely dreary. At the time of watching Andor, I was actually reading 1984 for the first time, and I say this not from a place of hyperbole. The two pieces of media served as nearly seamless companion pieces to each other. I was reading page after page of the intricate mechanisms of a tyrannical government and getting a scholar-level assessment of the ideologies of totalitarianism. I was also becoming increasingly more depressed at how bleak this hypothetical but also very valid world was. Then I'd put the book down and decide to cheer myself up a little with some Star Wars, at which point I'd see even more demoralising showcases of a malevolent, all-encompassing institution. Or maybe I'd be greeted with Karis Nemik giving this well-articulated analysis of how, under an oppressive regime, oppression manifests itself in all of these different insidious ways. One being the over-reliance on government technology and how that can be countered by obtaining personal sovereignty over the tools and equipment we use. Mastering a tool, being capable of using said tool with ultimate independence, sets you free. This inherent fight against oppression can be fought within all these different subsections of life, down to the basic acquiring of a skill. He also talks about how the vigorous pace of oppression undermines our capabilities of understanding it.
I mean, it's so confusing, isn't it? So much going wrong, so much to say, and all of it happening so quickly. The pace of oppression outstrips our ability to understand it, and that is the real trick of the Imperial thought machine.
Thanks, sir. That goes down nicely with 1984's demonstration of how language is a core part of human thought and contemplation, how it informs how we perceive the world around us, informs how we experience emotions and how we view our own selves, and how if said language was corrupted or skewed, that would essentially have similar effects to mind control.
There's a growing list of things we've known and forgotten, things they've pushed us to forget. Things like freedom.
Yeah, Andor is quite dark and somber, if that wasn't made clear already. The show is a foreboding political thriller that oppresses you with its bleakness. The storytelling is cold and unceremonious compared to the camp escapism of the movies. You wouldn't have these cynical, flat, unromantic shots like these in the original trilogy.
Come on, let's get this done.
The first action set piece, so to speak, that occurs in the show is this unromantic scuffle that takes place down in this dimly lit street that concludes with the protagonist executing a man who is begging for his life.
We're going together. I'll tell them what happened.
Andor equals based much. The cinematography is quite stark and colourless, there's no music, there's no over-choreographed fighting manoeuvres, it's just this dialogue-centred scene with no panache. The action itself consists of this clunky, undignified brawl on the floor. However, just because it's not filmed through this spectacular lens doesn't mean it's not engaging. It's a blend of atmospheric ugliness, not just ugly ugliness. And this manner of non-glamorous yet aesthetically pleasing storytelling is echoed throughout all of the technical departments of filmmaking, and to great effect. The soundtrack, the sound design, the editing, the script, the cinematography of course. Most of the scenes in this show are made up of these dialogue heavy sequences filmed with these static yet artfully framed reverse shots. The dialogue itself is fundamentally different from what you'd come to expect from Star Wars. It's more ordinary and detail oriented. Many of the things that are discussed are minute interdepartmental matters. There's a lot of stratagem as well, a lot of talk about in-universe events, and it's all delivered through this comprehensive, intricate, matter-of-fact dialogue.
Sir, the possibility of successfully navigating an asteroid field is approximately 3,720 to 1!
Never tell me the odds.
Have you modified your uniform?
Perhaps slightly.
This focusing in on the details only helps to add texture to this world. The sound design subtly emphasises the droning ambience of the various rooms, further complementing this feeling of tedious realism.
Being a leader isn't something one just turns on and off.
Does this tedium bore or disinterest you? Absolutely not. It makes the environments feel more tangible and lived in. Episode 7 opens with this shot of character Cyril Khan gazing out of his window from this drably lit room. His view outside is this domineering industrial backdrop that towers over him. That's followed up with this scene of him having this depressing breakfast as his academically ambitious mother bombards him with contempt. This is the kind of show Andor is.
Look at me. I don't believe in myself. I am desperate for approval.
The framing here is great, flat and calculated, yet artful. The score of this show is more in line with an electro thriller than anything grandiose, and when it does veer into jazzier territories, it's more in the vein of a cyberpunk. The most stylistic shot that comes to mind is this scene on the planet Neamos, where this downright awesome club mix kicks in. We dash across the ocean and pan up to what is essentially the Ibiza equivalent of the Star Wars universe. Later we get this electro-industrial synth track which accompanies this sequence of Andor strolling along the shorefront trying to lay low. That opens with a shot of this old lady smoking some kind of vape alongside this weird looking dude, a sight that immediately illustrates a more luxurious, indulgent society of people. It's such effective yet sleek scene setting. This is what imaginative, immersive storytelling is supposed to look like. We get this panning shot of those probe droids from Empire swooping down. It's like usually when modern Star Wars stuff flaunts memorabilia from the OG trilogy, it feels tacky, but here it's fine because the shot has so much panache and it works for the scene. This is about as upbeat as the show gets, however, because immediately following this, Cassian Andor is arrested for doing nothing and sent to one of the most horrifically dystopian prisons ever conceived in science fiction. Yeah, so halfway through the season, Andor's plotline takes quite a disconcerting turn as he's thrust into this futuristic prison manufactured by the Empire that essentially functions as a slave labour camp. Now we the audience are given quite a detailed insight into the architecture of the prison as well as how it functions. This is important because all of this further reinforces how systematically evil the Empire is. The very mechanisms as to how this prison works are inherently wicked, yet also multifaceted. So you have this giant prison system situated in the middle of a lake on the planet Narkina 5. The prison consists of 7 enormous cylinders that descend into the water. Each cylinder holds 5,000 inmates whom are divided into floors. On each floor there are multiple work tables, each consisting of 7 men who must do 12 hours of labour every day until their sentence is finished. The tables all compete amongst each other because the most productive table tables are rewarded with flavoured food. Food, by the way, that they have to suck out of a pipe at the end of the day. If you do a good job, maybe you get some flavour added to your liquid sludge. The head of each floor competes with the other floor leaders at being the most productive floor. Floor. So you have these descending, dividing levels of hierarchy and labour. The prison structure is almost cellular in nature. Now, not only is this all complex on a world-building basis, but it's also deviously well conceived on a thematic storytelling level, as oppression is inherent to the prison's design. Oppression, malevolence, psychological manipulation, the central theme and motif of the show incorporated into an in-universe structure.
Mimic sees oppression everywhere.
Most of the prisoners' flooring is rigged with electric currents that can be activated at any time to either incapacitate or kill the prisoners. The guards don't even need to heavily arm themselves because they can just activate the floors, and they've got these special boots on which makes them immune. Fucking bastards. It's so maniacally efficient. You also get a clear look at the incarceration system as we see Andor sentenced to 6 years for doing literally nothing. He just runs into a stormtrooper who begins to sinisterly grill and interrogate him.
What do you think you're doing?
Excuse me?
You keep looking around.
Just trying to figure out what's going on.
You a part of it?
Part of what?
Don't play dumb.
That was a very threatening scene. They really made stormtroopers intimidating in this show.
I'm just going through the story. It's right there.
You need to calm down, sir.
This must be how black people feel. It's also interesting because you could liken the nature of this prison system to various instances of real-life prisons that are barbarically similar in design. This isn't an exact parallel, but my mind went to the American prison industrial complex, where prisons were economically encouraged to house as many inmates as possible. Thus they began arresting people for petty crimes and giving them ridiculously long sentences just to fill the prisons. They'd plant weed on someone and say, "That's 10 years for you." Also, it should be noted that each cylinder contains 98 floors and 84 guards. 98, 84, 1984. Coincidence, mayhaps? So the Empire are arresting thousands of not even criminals, shipping them to this complex and forcing them to do non-stop labour. And the reveal at the end of the season as to what this work is all going towards was just the final masterstroke that all the more tied this universe together. I mean, it's obvious, it's staring you in the face, but it's still brilliant. There's so much more about that prison that we could delve into, but the point being, it's a seamless showcase of the inhumane oppressiveness of the Empire. Through all of these dystopian themes that I've been discussing, the Empire of Star Wars has never felt more oppressive, never been such an overwhelmingly daunting threat. That's not to discount The Empire Strikes Back, because The Empire was adequately menacing in that film for what it was. Their portrayal in that is perfect. But Andor takes things to a whole new level, namely because the tone it's operating under allows it to. It veers into such unsettlingly dark territories, and I applaud it for doing so. This is the grown-up version of Star Wars in all the best possible, non-pretentious ways. The world building has a thorough and vast scope to it. We see the fearsomeness of the Empire, but we see it throughout all its various faculties. Its prison industrial complex, its security bureau, its security subsidiaries, its interplanetary operations. I sound like a nerd, but I only bring up all of this lore because it's important to the overall storytelling of the show. We see how the Empire interrogate people, see how they occupy and demoralize a town. It's not the first to do it, but it's an exquisitely crafted, multi-tiered approach to world building. On a broad level, we know what the Empire represents, but we also experience their presence on numerous individual bases through the many perspectives we are shown. We see a lot of different cruel and cynical things being done to a lot of different people. Good fucking lord, that torture scene. Didn't know I was gonna get served some Joseph Mengele pastiche in my Star Wars show.
Chicken jockey!
I'm Steve.
You actually begin to hate the Empire and fear them as well. To a substantial degree, you're intimidated by them. Yet despite how totally vile the villains in this show are, at no point do they feel like caricatures. There's not a whiff of one-dimensionality to them. They don't feel like satirical statements, they don't feel like desperate attempts to shock the viewer. They feel feasibly evil. Almost utterly maniacal, yet not in a black and white way. And I think this is achieved through the mannered storytelling, the naturalistic acting, as well as the rich dialogue. The villains you see all have well-rounded ideologies behind their awful conduct. For as much as you come to hate the Empire, the Imperial point of view characters that were given are ones that you actually grow to weirdly root for. Deidre Miro is a menacing and merciless individual, but so goddamn fascinating to follow. Deidre, and yeah, even though the cause she works for is immoral, and even though she's probably a total sociopath, I found myself on her side during her scenes to some extent.
The very worst thing you can do right now is bore me.
The worst thing you can do is lie to me.
It's for these reasons that I once again compare this show to Game of Thrones. It puts you in the shoes of these terrible people, but forces you to empathise with them. Deidre was probably one of the best characters of the whole show.
The longer we wait to identify a disorder, the harder it is to treat the disease. Do you understand my meaning, Legret?
Yes, sir.
Don't trouble yourself writing the memorandum. I'll reassign it.
Those ISB meeting scenes were great. The detail-heavy conversations that were thorough and full-on, yet easy to understand and follow, is exactly what peak Game of Thrones dialogue was like. To cap it all off, they have Anton Lesser there, just a brilliant actor.
Ongoing.
As is your unfinished memorandum of recommendations regarding the problem.
Now, because the show goes to such lengths to demonstrate how atrocious the Empire is, because it so vehemently beats you down with the scope and insidiousness of the Empire's oppression and reach, when the moments of retribution, the rebellions, do come, they are all the more profound and impactful. When Cassian and the prisoners finally do make an escape attempt, and they're going up against such overwhelming odds, but they have this one singular path to freedom, it's honestly quite emotionally pungent. It's made so meaningful because of all the context and world building. I found the whole effort quite rousing as I saw tens of unarmed prisoners get shot down, all in the struggle for freedom. I was moved. Then Andy Serkis gives this speech to the inmates, spurring them all to break out, and he's playing it so seriously and dramatically, but it's all 100% earned. The sophistication of the dialogue earns the severity.
You get them moving and you keep them moving until we put this place behind us.
There's another speech that occurred in the season finale that had similarly profound effects on me. I've talked before on this channel about swearing in movies and television and how swear words are a tool to punctuate dialogue in scenes, give them a hardened bite.
You twisted fuck!
Now, a lot of the time you'll have storytelling that doesn't earn the swear words, where it becomes try hard and insistent. Ooh, you gotta take me seriously now because I swore, I said the F word. Now, Andor has multiple uses of the word bastard, which I know isn't the most vulgar of curse words, but still, like, the way I'm wording this is like, oh, bastard. However, my point being that the idea of bringing profanity into Star Wars is quite a bold concept. It could come over as a juvenile piece of media trying desperately to look adult all of a sudden. Yet, in Andor, the swearing works. They're justified and warranted because of all that aforementioned maturity that the show has cultivated and earned. So when we get the line, fight the bastards, there's no air of cringe to the sentiment, and it's successfully invigorating and triumphant. It's truly like a fuck yeah moment. It's brilliant.
I'd wake up early and be fighting these bastards from the start.
I think when you want to do retribution in film, the longer and harsher the protagonist is subjugated, the more exalting it is when they finally do rebel and stand up against tyranny. That's what it's like watching this season. It's beaten down, beaten down, beaten down, then finally, at last, a shot at equilibrium, a change in the wind, a spark of rebellion. You know how in a Pink Floyd track, the longer that quiet build-up segment is, the more gratifying it is when you reach the climax. Animals, sheep, that finale, like, fuck me, is that the sound of destiny? That's sort of what it's like watching season 1 of Andor.
It's easy for the dead to tell you to fight. And maybe it's true, maybe fighting's useless.
If we can fight half as hard as we've been working, we will be home in no time.
The main theme of Andor is musically arranged to accentuate this very emotion. When you close your eyes and listen to the music, you can envision this great plane of somberness and oppression, and every now and then there are these upsurges of light, these hints at rebellion, cracks in the immense concrete structure that is the Empire. You can imagine all of these high synth rises to be various acts of rebellion occurring throughout this great space, the galaxy. Slowly they'll become more frequent and louder, and eventually they'll begin to congregate and form a more tangible resistance. All of this triumphant music is suggestive of this righteous uprising that's on the horizon. Finally, an upward positive trajectory. Of course, it's beautiful because we know what the uprising looks like. It's the story of the original trilogy, that classic archetypal hero's journey. This is a profound show. This is a profound show. The score was actually composed by Nicholas Brittle, who was the composer behind Succession, an exceedingly talented individual. Now, it does behoove me to calm down a little bit now and preface something. It is primarily the scope of Andor that makes it work, that makes it interesting, and towards the beginning of the series, things are quite basic story-wise. It wasn't utterly captivating right from the get-go. There was nothing wrong with the way it was done, it's just that it took a while for things to get interesting. The first 3 episodes do feel somewhat like your typical Star Wars Disney Plus spin-off show, a little bit formulaic, but there are breadcrumbs of intrigue here and there, the grittiness, the acting, and Cyril Karn's plotline, etc. We were getting all these flashback scenes to Andor as a kid, and it just felt so familiar to all of the things I see on Disney Plus. I was a bit like, I don't really care about any of this shit. We're really doing this again, are we? Not saying it's unnecessary for the plot, but just the presentation was bland. At the end of episode 3, however, we get this interesting dialogue between Andor and Stellan Skarsgård's character, and that spurred me on to keep going, and I'm glad I did. Of course I'm glad I did. I just spent the last half hour glazing the shit out of the show. From that point forward, the world of Andor branches out and expands, introducing all these new perspectives of the rebellion and the Empire. You get the ISB, you get Mon Mothma's Coruscant storyline, and for me those were the most intriguing narratives of the entire show. That's when the political scheming comes into play and you see how intricate the story actually is. Andor himself as a character isn't exceptionally interesting, it's more so the world around him. Mon Mothma, Luthen, Dedra Meero, they're the strongest characters in this. Watching Luthen and Mothma scheme in that antique store he has, which is all a front, that was awesome. That's what I'm here for. Mothma having to put on this pseudo-persona to not draw attention to her actual motives. This is essentially what the rebellion was in its infancy, and they have to be so careful and discreet. It's where so much of the show's tension comes from, and it's backed up by the fact that in this, the Empire is such an imposing force. There was one particular scene with Mon Mothma, and it was the one that made me go, okay, this show might actually be substantially good. Is when she's hosting that party and she's trying to recruit the help of her old friend, and she basically covertly reveals to him what her true motives are, and the dialogue is so well written, the acting is top notch. I don't compare the dialogue writing of this show to peak Game of Thrones lightly. This shit is tense, man.
My driver is an ISB plant and reports on my secret humanitarian programs.
But yeah, I felt tension and excitement watching these scenes. I felt strong emotions viewing a Star Wars piece of media. For instance, when Luthen subtly hints to Mothma that he was behind the Aldhani heist, she says something to the effect of, "Do you realise what you've just done?" in this mortified tone, and you feel that.
I explained to you the risk of new faces, but you seem to know better.
You realise what you've done?
You know what's at stake, you understand the weight of things. This was the first large-scale affront to the Empire. It was a daring and extremely dangerous in-universe operation, and that's exactly how it's presented. It's also how they're going to pay for all those X-Wings and shit, because war is expensive, my brother. But this all goes to say, the Empire has never felt more domineering, and thus the rebellion has never felt more desperate and bold. This show, with its numerous narratives, adds a whole new dimension of weight to the plight of the Rebel Alliance. Oh, I get why you're so scared now. This is what the show's done. It has taken some of the basic pre-existing aspects and themes of Star Wars and gone, let's really make this sink in. A film can say a certain faction is evil all they want, like these guys are awful, oh the worst of the worst, but unless you actually feel that, unless the film actually makes the audience feel that, then it's all kind of pissing in the wind, it's meaningless. You can insist all you want through dialogue or exposition how scary the grasshoppers are, but until we have that scene where Hopper comes down and does that scary walk, I'ma hold my breath. Give us storytelling that strongly accentuates and demonstrates these themes. You just need creative filmmakers to effectively characterize these ideas and themes. That's all this franchise, this fucking stupid franchise has needed all this time. Just some goddamn passion, some imagination. Rey is the chosen one, she's incredible, we all love Rey, but do we really? Because you have to demonstrate a character's likability and value without resorting to derivative, formulaic, obligatory storytelling.
The Force will be with you. Always.
There's this weird thing that happened midway through watching Andor when they were executing that heist and a shootout initiated. I was actually like, oh, I don't want any of these characters to die. I'm actually fearful for them. I care about them. Isn't this what's supposed to happen in every movie? There was also this funny thought that kept passing through my brain every so often whilst watching the show. It was that no matter how grounded and deadly sophisticated this show was trying to be, I still had that knowledge that this was all going to amount to a 19-year-old named Luke Skywalker using magic to blow up the Death Star. I guess if you could criticise the show for anything, it would be that tonal disparity between its own brutal seriousness and the campy escapism of the originals. But in actuality, that didn't take away from my experience. It was just funny, really. So yeah, I feel like I've shared enough of my thoughts on this show. That was fun to talk about. It's nice to say something positive about a modern Star Wars installment. Not to be hyperbolic or anything, but Star Wars is important. Its existence is profound. I'm talking about the original trilogy, like the phenomena that it was when it first came out. When discussing the history of film, it is a vital part of the conversation, not just for what it did, but what it was. Because the first Star Wars, and Empire Strikes Back in particular, were such succinct and accessible retellings of ancient stories of humanity. And the first film, I'd say, was almost an avant-garde prospect when it was first conceived. And then Empire was independently funded using the proceeds of its predecessor. George Lucas had an idea and a deep, genuine love for not just films, but stories, like the entirety of storytelling. He was an auteur. The DNA of so many classic wonders of cinema and literature are imbued into those original films, and to some extent the prequels as well. Because the story was so accessible and relatable in all the best possible ways, it spoke to millions of people, it connected with so many individuals, and that's a special thing. Sometimes immense popularity is indicative of greatness. Star Wars brought the world together almost, because they are some of the most cinematically resonant films ever put to screen. It's funny because I'm not sure what would happen if you said all this to your typical cinephile. Like, would they just scoff and say, oh well yes, but they're only blockbusters, they're not true films, they're only movies. Like, what a fucking lie. People might resent Star Wars for birthing the blockbuster and bolstering the monetization of film, but it shouldn't be blamed for being popular. If you're someone who calls themselves an advocate for the craft of storytelling, then you should revere the Star Wars films. The original Star Wars films, like, you should revere them in the same way that you revere Metropolis. They're some of the best films you can watch and immediately be aware of their inherent quality. They're not like one of those films you see when you become a cinephile that you have to educate yourself into appreciating. There is a purity in anyone from any background being able to immediately resonate with Star Wars. And it's movies like these that cause us to even care about films in the first place, like the ones that hit us in our formative years. And it did come out in the 70s, which is the decade for ambitious, experimental storytelling. It's just as special to me as Eraserhead, Clockwork Orange, 2001: A Space Odyssey, Godfather. The franchise never needed to be anything more than that initial set of films. George Lucas did go on to make the prequels, which, fair enough, we all know how they turned out, for better or for worse. Later, Disney bought the franchise, and more or less all of their additions to this universe have been spiritually bankrupt, and I mean that in every sense of the word, because when an artist imbues a work with their imagination, it is a spiritual process, and there was no artistry taking place at the conception of the vast majority of these Disney projects. Anyway, after years of the franchise being raped over and over again, we now finally have Andor, which isn't necessarily a masterpiece, but at the very least it has made something meaningful out of Star Wars. It's made something worth watching, thought-provoking, definitely for an older generation of people, but at this point, like, it's all old folks who watch this shit anyway, like, no one else cares. The art and its audience have both matured together, you could say, a bit like Harry Potter. It's taken pre-existing concepts inherent to the core structure of the story, the Empire and the Rebellion, and it's built upon them in creative and inspired ways, like hallelujah. And it's also a fairly thorough dissection of a dystopian dictatorship, as well as the nature of totalitarianism. A rather timeless commentary that can be applied to so many things. Again, it's not perfect, not all of it is extraordinary, but I'm not really arsed. I'm just happy that this enticed and immersed me, both on a fantasy level, but also an intellectual one. Very intellectually stimulating.
I've given up all chance at inner peace. I made my mind a sunless space.
It's not that I'm happy because this new Star Wars media is an incredible masterpiece. I'm just happy that this new Star Wars media is meaningful. Like the Rebellion's position at the start of this season, Andor is a tiny opposing force of imagination amidst a giant landscape of oppressive, soulless mediocrity. Again, that motif of that one little beam of hope. Tony Gilroy, Dan Gilroy, all the other writers, just keep doing your thing because you guys obviously care.
And remember to fucking subscribe. Bah! Bosh!
Thanks to the patrons. Thank you DF, thank you Casey Gann, thank you Magical Weasel, thank you Mason Lydon, thank you Matt Delaney, thank you Oh I'm Dean.